Hello and praise the Lord. We will be talking about artificial intelligence and God today. It is our honor to have Jeff with us, and let me introduce to you about Jeff. He's an astrophysicist, and he's a research scholar at Reasons to Believe, the organization that we have been connecting with recently. He's the author of Escaping the Beginning. It's a book. Is there life out there? And also, who's afraid of the multiverse? So these are some of the topics that we will be talking a little bit more detailed as the time, as we have more options to speak to him, and as we have more options to connect and see how we can go through it. But today we will not be speaking about all these things. But the latest book that he wrote, and he probably that will be ready for maybe 2022. So we will be talking about the artificial intelligence and how does it matter as a Christian. How do we understand artificial intelligence? How do we actually, do we really take it? Do we really want to stop it, or do we really want to use it? What are the repercussions of how the artificial intelligence is heading at, and where is it heading at, and how does it influence our world? So these are the topics that we'll be talking about today. And Jeff, welcome to Rakshana Television. This is the first time that we are hosting you on to Rakshana Television, but we are honored to have you with us.
Well, I'm excited to be here today and looking forward to our conversation.
Sure. Yeah. So tell us about a little bit more about yourself, Jeff. Since this is the first time that we are meeting and we are introducing you to the Telugu-speaking the audiences of Rakshana Television. We have lots of audiences in US, lots of audiences in UK and other parts of the world as well. But primarily, it's in India and Telugu-speaking people. So, would you like to just introduce a little bit more about yourselves?
Yeah, so my name's Jeff Zwarenk. I have been interested in science for as long as I can remember. One of my earliest childhood memories, I was 3 years old, was watching my dad, who was a chemist, do demonstrations down in the basement of our house, and just being fascinated with the things that he could do, the chemicals he'd mix together, the noises that it would make, the sounds, just being fascinated that he knew how to explain all of that. And so I've just been fascinated with how science works and pursued it for as long as I can remember. Also, remember seeing my parents baptized in the 102 River outside the city where I live not too long after that. And so just science and Christianity are two important drivers in my life. I went to college at Iowa State University, got a bachelor's in physics, got a PhD in astrophysics, because largely that's where I saw that science and Christianity intersected, as they intersected a lot in the astrophysics realm. And so I thought I wanted to do that. And what I have found is that as I have explored how science and Christianity interact, especially out in things related to astrophysics, is that they actually work very well together. And you read a list of the books that I've written. Is there life out there? Who's afraid of the multiverse? Can we escape the beginning? These are all questions I've had about how would Christianity handle these sorts of discoveries and what's going on. And so that's really what kind of drove my interest in artificial intelligence. Is that's one of those things where most people assume that, once we produce artificial intelligence, that just kind of means Christianity's wrong, and what do we do with that? And so that's kind of got a lot of curiosity in terms of as science and technology progresses, how does Christianity interact well with that? And what I found is that it interacts very well. So I'm kind of excited about our conversation about artificial intelligence and how Christianity interacts with it.
So we have a lot of noise, at least in India, that science and Christianity, they cannot go together. If you are a scientist, basically you have to be an atheist, or somebody that that denounce God and science doesn't make sense kind of attitude. How do you approach to it? Since you hold a PhD degree in science, and You also are researching into artificial intelligence, and how does it come together for you?
Well, just in a very practical measure, as I have, I've been a Christian for most of my life, for well over 40 years. I've been interested in science for that same amount of time, and as a practical measure, they work very well together because as I study Christianity and want to know who God is, I realize that He's revealed Himself in creation, and the way we understand creation is science. That's the tool He's given us to understand creation. And as I do my scientific work better, I am more and more pointed to the idea that there's a mind behind all of this, that there's an order and regularity that fits best with the best explanation for all that as a creator. And so practically, just at a personal level, my Christianity and my scientific studies both mutually reinforce one another. But your comment about how there is this very dominant narrative, and even here in the United States, that somehow science is antagonism towards Christianity and Christianity is antagonistic towards science. And just from an academic perspective, that narrative doesn't hold up. It dates back to some work done in the early 1900s by a couple of people who advanced this warfare model of how science and Christianity interact. And when you look at the actual academic research into that model is just thoroughly discredited academically. And so Christianity and science have actually worked very well together. They've worked complementary. Sometimes they work side by side, not interacting. Occasionally they do have areas of conflict, but in general, science and Christianity work well together. And I thought that was a very fascinating discovery to make as I kind of delved into the history of science and Christianity. So it's one of those narratives that is very dominant out there, but it doesn't have the academic credibility to stand up under scrutiny.
Okay, so when it comes to your own experience, Dr. Jeff, you also are teaching in UCLA, and what do you mean by artificial intelligence? It says artificial, at the same time it says intelligence. And everybody is excited about artificial intelligence these days. At least in India, we have a lot of companies coming together, and programmers and coding people that pursuing artificial intelligence. They wanted to build things like bot kind of things, robots, and artificial intelligence is the buzzword these days. And what do you say about that? Is there a conflict between the Christianity and the artificial intelligence that we are talking about these days?
Well, I think one of the first things that's important to do is to kind of clarify what are we talking about when we're talking about artificial intelligence. Because, I'm just in my growing up, artificial intelligence was always kind of the sentient android type people. If you're in the Star Wars world, you've got R2-D2 and C-3PO, and it's just littered with various types of things that are aware of what's going on, can make decisions. They're basically minds inside, some sort of silicon type matrix. You go with Star Trek, Star Wars, Marvel Comics, all of them have their sentient, and that's what historically artificial intelligence has been that. But as I look at the landscape now, there's actually kind of three different kinds of artificial intelligence that is being talked about. And they use they kind of modify the intelligence in each way. One is artificial narrow intelligence. There's artificial general intelligence and artificial super intelligence. And so kind of working through each of those, artificial narrow intelligence is basically it's I'll say program, but that's kind of a bad term to use for it. A program that can learn from past experiences and do things better. And so kind of the stereotypical example of this are chess playing routines, that they don't just have this list of, okay, if this, do this. It's not this pre-programmed algorithm. They actually play the game, learn, oh, this didn't work well, and they can adjust what they do and do things differently in the exact same scenario the next time based on what they've learned. And they've gotten to the place where these artificial narrow intelligent chess programs are far better than the best human chess players. In fact, we don't even play the humans don't even play the programs for competition anymore. We just learn from these chess programs to increase our ability to play chess. But it's so there. It's a very narrow intelligence. These things and take things in a very narrow realm and do them very, very, very well, and have some sort of learning associated with it.
Right.
So if you move up to the next level, the general intelligence, this is kind of closer to the historical AI type world, where the sentient robots, if you will, and they're an artificial general intelligence, which is something that doesn't exist at this point in time, is not only can it learn in this narrow region, but it can also take that knowledge, apply it other places, and do things. That's and again, there's generally this idea of a sentience or self-awareness about what's going on. And then the super intelligence, the artificial super intelligence, would be take that general, or AGI, the artificial general intelligence, and then just amplify it by all the intelligence that it was going to require. It's going to have an intelligence far beyond what human intelligence has, and so it will have the capacity to do things. You compare humans to ants or rats or mice. It's like the level of intelligence is just incredibly different, and so that's the kind of super intelligence that's being talked about there. So those are the three types, and all the AI that exists today are these artificial narrow intelligences, and I don't see that really has any conflict with Christianity, and it's not even clear to me that if we develop an AGI that's in conflict with Christianity either.
But at the same time, people have also concerns about artificial intelligence taking. For example, my daughter speaks to Alexa in the morning, and she says, "Okay, play some Christian songs," and it plays Christian songs. It doesn't play what she wants, but it plays what it is feeded into the program. So whatever you feed into that program, it comes out. And when you speak to Siri on my telephone, say, "Hey Siri, can you call such and such," and it calls. So over a period of time, the mediums like computers, the phones, etc., are they going to be stagnant? Are they going to be the actual mediums? Or, in your opinion, in the future, how does artificial intelligence is going to actually challenge our privacy, challenge our You said there is no conflict between Christianity and the artificial intelligence, the science, but we also see that it is already invading into, or it is already recording the conversations that we have. It is already recording the kind of shopping that we do, the kind of things we purchase, things we sell, things we speak to each other, etc. So with this kind of artificial intelligence, do you see there is a threat or a concern to humanity?
Well, no, I think you've identified a profound point that people need to be aware of, is that the way these AIs work, it's not a mental process like we have, where we think and there's some logic and we reason from X to Y to Z. The way these AIs work is that there's a set of parameters, and you basically feed in a bunch of data that connects makes various connections within the AI framework that allow it to say, okay, given this input, I make that output. And there's two aspects of that. One, the data you feed to train it determines what sort of behavior you get out. But two, and probably more profoundly important, is that in order for these things to work, they need an incredible amount of data. And the way you get that data is you basically monitor what's going on. So the reason why Alexa or Siri choose those songs when your daughter says, "Hey, play a Christian song," is that is the group, or of all the people that have asked those sorts of questions and then listened afterwards, these are the ones that were the most popular. And so that's the data that Siri or Alexa is used to make that decision for your daughter.
Right.
If you want your daughter to get a better selection, you now have to collect data on your daughter's preferences, which now Siri has to know. And so you can see where there's this huge data collection process, And one of the things I'm concerned about, and so my general sense or my general message with AI is that it's a pretty powerful tool. How we choose to use it as people is going to be very important. I know that there have been a number of large cyber attacks where organizations of some sort, whether they be companies or countries or whatever, have tried to break into the UC data system, there's mortgage systems, to get all of this data, because data is going to be the medium by which you can influence and control people. And so having all your personal data recorded and out there I think that's going to be a problem and something we really need to be conscious of. And that's not so much a technology issue as it is how do we as humans use this technology? And I'm not sure we've got the maturity to use it well yet.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. One of the points that I'm kind of getting from what you said just now is, it's not the technology, but the people who use the technology that matters. But over a period of time, is there a chance that the technology overrules what you choose? Technology actually dictates you what you have to choose and what you have to decide. So, do you see a threat like that in the future?
I am concerned that we allow a threat like that to happen, but and at this point, and I'm skeptical that we will ever generate an artificial general intelligence that's truly sentient and can think and do all of that. In the same way that we are sentient, which means that everything the AIs do is encompassed in what humans allow them to do. So, for example, I go back to the chess playing. The computers can play chess far better than we do, but unless we set up a parameter that allows them to make decisions on how the chess game goes, the ANIs that play chess are limited in what they can do. And so that's kind of what I see with a lot of the AIs that are out there. Alexa and Siri and all these things, they can do a bunch of stuff if we allow them to. And again, I think they're pretty powerful tools, but as I've thought about that, there's a lot of powerful tools we use, but we make sure we use them well. I mean, a car is a wonderful tool. I can go out and drive, I can get places, I can help people. If I now allow my 8-year-old kid to use my car and to drive it, I'm negligent. That's not a good decision.
Right.
So in the AIs, if we say, well, hey, the AIs can make better decisions.
Right.
Well, I can tell from the studies I've had, the training that you give the AIs, there's bias, there's lots of things that the AIs, if we cede control to the AIs, that's where the problem happens. And the challenge in that is that often allowing the AI to just make the decisions is convenient and often produces good results. But if we're not careful, we're going to do that so much that we're going to give them control in areas, and they're going to do a lot of damage. But ultimately, that's on us, not on the AIs, because the AI isn't thinking, ooh, I need to gain control here.
So you're talking about the responsibility or the accountability always lies with human beings who uses this technology. But the question that I wanted to ask you now is, the human society is run by humans, and they have ethical and moral standards by which they dictate, they call something as bad and they call something good. And God, biblically speaking, made us in the image of God, made human beings in the image of God. And but we are making technology in the image, I don't know what it is. And that technology is deciding what you should buy, what turn you should take, where whom you should meet. For example, if I'm searching on a browser to buy something, based on my search input, the artificial intelligence gives me data what to buy, what to search for, and what not to buy, etc., etc. So, do you see that man is creating a duplicate of man himself, or instead of being governed by the image that God made us to be, are we going to be governed by the technology that we made? What do you say?
I have a suspicion we'll end up there. Again, we're at a place where humans are going to have that choice of what we do, and I'm not entirely sure what choice we're going to make. I loved what you said there, that humans are created in the image of God, and there is inherent in that image a sense of justice and goodness and right and wrong. None of the AIs have that, a moral system to them, or a philosophical system. Again, people are working towards that, and I'm skeptical that that's ever going to work. But right now, the AI is just making associations, and all of those associations are built on the data we've trained it on. And there's this odd phenomena where humans seem to want to see human behavior in AIs. So, case in point, there was a study that was published, and this was done intentionally, not unintentionally, but where they built an AI that the intent of the AI was to look at images and distinguish images of huskies from images of wolves. And so they trained, they built the AI, and they put a whole bunch of data into it to train them. And then they used the trained AI, fed a bunch of images in to see how well it did. And it fed in 10 images of huskies and wolves, and it got 8 of them correct. And so you're thinking, oh, hey, 80%, that's pretty good. We're almost there. That's kind of the way we're thinking. The reality of it was that the data that they had trained on was the wolves all had snow in the background. And the huskies didn't have snow in the background. And so when they fed these 10 images in, the 2 that it got wrong were the wolf that had no snow in the background and the husky that had snow in the background. And so we look at that and say, wow, we're 80% right. But the reality of it is what the AI is doing is nothing like the way we think. It was looking at an entirely different correlation that had nothing to do with wolves and huskies. So now let's put that same sort of scenario in terms of Alexa or Siri or something deciding what food do you buy, or what results should I show you on your web search, or what doctor should you go see. The AI knows nothing about what's good, what's right, what's wrong. All it knows is these correlations. And so I think we need to be very careful and get the message out there that as humans, we need to make sure we understand what the AI is doing. And I think that's a very important area of AI research, is to make sure we can understand what the AI is doing. But then we also need to make sure that we are providing that moral framework so that the choices we use with AI are good and actually advance the good of people and not do the harm and damage. Because there's a lot of harm and damage that could be done by these very powerful AIs if we just leave them to their own devices, or rather fail to execute our role as kind of guardians of what's good and right and true.
Right. The combination of artificial intelligence and also the satellite communication, I think the Tesla is also running a driverless, vehicles and a lot of automation and machine learning is the buzzword these days. And do you also see? I think it's a blessing to us. It's a blessing, and it is data driven. But do you also see that this blessing grows to a level that the machine starts thinking like you and I, starts feeling like you and I?
That I've thought a lot about that, and the challenge in answering that question is that it's something that we don't know the answer to, because what is true in the history of AI, the pursuit of AI, is that there are numerous places where we've said, oh, if AI can only do that, then it'll be thinking like humans. And every time we've gotten to that place, we look at it and say, well, we accomplished what we want. Chess was one of those. That's part of why AI focused so much around chess in the early days. Is that, all right? Hey, if AI can beat humans at chess, then it'll be truly intelligent. And then we get done and we've made it, and we say, well, no, that's not really intelligence because it's not doing things the way we do. And so now you say, all right, well, maybe now we'll add this, and then it'll be. And so my suspicion is everything AI does is driven by an algorithm, which, as I've thought about it, everything I do is also algorithmic in some sense. I was trying to figure out how to connect with you. There's a process I went through, and so I can build an AI that would do part of that process. But there's also another component that while everything I do has an algorithm, nothing I do is just an algorithm. So I'm also thinking about, is this good? Is it right? Should I do this? Does this honor God when I do it? None of those are algorithms. Those are a different class of question. And so everything we're doing with AI is putting more algorithms in. And we kind of have this assumption that once we get a complicated enough algorithm, eventually it's going to be sentient. But if I understand Christianity correctly, that sentience actually flows out of God creating us in his image. That I don't think that's a material thing, for one, but it's also clearly beyond just our physical, how do the electrons and protons move in my body, how do the nutrients come in, my social interactions. There's something beyond that. And so that's why I'm skeptical that we're ever going to create an AI that thinks and is truly sentient. But I do think we're going to make AIs that mimic human behavior more and more, that we're going to assume they're sentient. But I don't think we're ever going to see actually sentient AIs.
Right. So with let's pretend, let's understand that, maybe after, say, 10 or 15 or 20 years from now, the programming improved to a level that AI, started telling us what to do, what not to do, etc., etc. Do you see any socio-economic disruptions because of the technology?
I really do, because among other things, a lot of what AI and most automation actually is designed to do is to take those tasks that are, I use the term menial, not in a derogatory way, but they're tasks that are just physical. They don't require a ton of high mental thought to figure out how to do. Well, as we get more and more AIs, what we do is we take more and more of those jobs and make them done by computers. Well, I find it interesting because when you look at how humans are created, before Adam and Eve sinned, God put them in the garden. God told Adam to tend the garden and care for it. He gave them the job of naming all the animals. He gave him Eve as a wife to interact with. That God designed humanity to work. And if we're not careful, what we're going to do is we're going to abdicate our role of caring for creation to these AIs, again, not that are thinking, but that are just able to make decisions. I'll even go so far as to say I think we're going to make AIs that, even though they're not thinking, can actually make better decisions or draw better conclusions about what to do, because, again, of that algorithmic nature.
Right.
And the temptation is going to be to allow the AI to make those decisions instead of saying, all right, this is what the AI recommends, now what are we going to do? I think that's going to be the place where we as humans really need to make sure that we push back and say, until we understand what the AI is doing, why this decision comes out, we need to make sure, before we go anywhere, we need to understand that. So kind of, again, I'll go back to playing chess. The chess AI isn't thinking, well, is this good? It just says, I know this is going to gain position and ultimately win. I can go in and replicate those moves, but until I understand them, I really am not playing chess. I'm just allowing the AI to dump data, and I'm just blindly following. I don't think we want to have that sort of approach with AIs out in places that actually impact how people live, like what sort of jobs do people get? What sort of food do people eat? What doctors can they see? What sort of news do they hear? What sort of search results? I think those are going to have dramatic economic and socio-political just because of the way that will allow the very powerful or the AIs to manipulate the masses of the people.
Yeah, 10 years from 10 years ago, I used to remember maybe 50 or 70 or maybe even more than that numbers to call, and because I have an Android phone now, and that takes care of recording those numbers for me, and I keep a name to it, and when I ask Siri, it calls directly to those particular numbers. Right now, I don't remember any numbers except maybe a couple of numbers of family. But so the technology like this, in the future, especially the technology, for example, we invest in shares, we the stock market, etc., etc., and the AI these days is the buzzword even in the stock market, stocks and shares, etc., etc. It tells you where to invest, it tells you where not to invest, and there is, it is just, as you said, it is just numbers, it is just algorithm. There is no feeling, there is no emotion attached to it. Earlier, I had an emotion and I had a feeling, or I had a attachment to a number, but now it is not. It is just ask Siri and it calls. So do you also foresee in the future that our society is going to be so blessed with AI that we lose these emotions, we lose these contacts and connections, and is there a possibility that AI also gains those connections, gains those emotions and connections?
I think that's a profound point, and one of the things that I found in studying, or in preparing to write my book, is just how important relationships are to people. There's a long-term study done by Harvard of Harvard graduates of inner-city Boston people, and the directors of the study over the last 80 years, two of them, have made the point that loneliness and isolation is every bit as damaging as smoking and other things that we identify as, those are clearly bad. That humans are designed for relationships. That's what the evidence says, and so relationships are really important. And I relate to your comment about remembering numbers, because that's how I knew, like I said, 50 to 100 numbers, and I could call people when I was traveling. I knew how to get a hold of people, and now I just don't ever use that skill. And one place where I think it does, it impacts relationships, and somebody read this and I recognized that it was true, is that it used to be a lot of conversations you'd have. You'd be sitting around the dinner table or watching a TV show, and somebody, oh yeah, I remember when that happened. And so somebody, well, when was that? And it was like, I think it was 1987, because we'd just gotten back from taking a vacation. So you're actually having this conversation and trying to remember something. Right. You're building a relationship because you're having to think back and make all these connections. But you wanted to know when the last time the Kansas City Royals won the World Series. You don't sit back and think through. You go, hey Siri, when was the last time Kansas City won the World Series? And it just tells you. And so it's you're blessed with being able to get the information quickly, but on the other side, you've taken out if you don't intentionally replace it, you've taken out the importance of building relationships that are there. And it's not like just because the information is there, people are going to have bad relationships. But I do think, unless we're very intentional about building relationships, we're going to allow the way the technology will play out will diminish relationships, and that's going to have real big problems for society. Not only in the detriment of relationships, but I think we're going to lose important skills that help us build relationships. I don't know that memorizing numbers helps build relationships, but having an ability to recall things is very important to having good relationships.
Yeah, that's a very important thing. I mean, I've kind of I've been thinking about it and struggling about it. But at the same time, what about the spirituality that we have? As Christians, we pray, we read Bible, we relate with people, and get together and pray, get together and do things that mattered a lot to us as a community. And if the AI takes that place where, hey Siri, I want to listen, XYZ sermon, and it just brings it to you, and you don't have to go to that church, you don't have to meet that person, and over a period of time, do you also see, as a, is it going to, can the artificial intelligence be used for spirituality, and can it actually fill that gap of knowing God through a person, or how do you see it? Is there usages for artificial intelligence within the kingdom?
I know people will use it that way. I remember there was I want to say it was a Buddhist. They developed an AI that would give Buddhist messages. And again, it was just a conglomerate. It was it took the data of various things and produced these messages. And I know there are AIs out there that could, for example, go study C.S. Lewis or pick a famous Christian pastor from the past, and like A.W. Tozer, maybe that would be somebody good, who go and study, read all of those works to quote unquote understand them. And again, I'm not sure what understanding to an AI means, but nonetheless get enough of that it could actually give a message from that person on AI. So obviously Tozer died well before AI came about, but you could build an AI that would understand the way Tozer spoke and the important themes and messages, and then replicate that in a message about AI. So I think there is some kind of interesting utility that we could get from that. But again, I would go back to Christianity is not it's not a head knowledge of God or having more head knowledge or even intellectual knowledge. But Christianity is a relationship with a creator, and a relationship not just with the creator, but other people who he's created. And so if we use that technology to circumvent the relationships, we're going to diminish what God has created us for. And so, I do think it's easy, or you could listen to messages from pastors around the world that are great. I think that's a phenomenal thing. But ultimately, God calls us to get together and worship. There's an individual aspect, but there's a corporate aspect of it as well. And at least what I've seen with how the pandemic has held, that there's at least a large segment of Christians who will hey, I can just watch the sermon on my couch in the morning instead of getting together and fellowshipping with people. And that's where I think we tend to think of AI as, we can do this, and often if you're well-adjusted and strong, you can use the technology and not false prey to the challenges that it does. But we also have to realize that we got to take care of the people who may not have that strength, or may not have that ability, or may be weak in certain ways. So we got to pay attention to the weaker in society and make sure that they're taken care of as well. So I think we tend to focus on, is it inherently wrong, or I could listen to a message and then make sure I'm in Sunday and build good relationships. But I've also got a very healthy family, a healthy support system, and so that works. Now, you take someone who's just barely getting by and about, having some mental challenges, you now provide them that opportunity that's likely going to push them deeper into poor relationships, and that's going to be detrimental. So we got to look at not just the strong and what could be, but also what are some of the problems and difficulties we could cause people just because they don't have the strength to deal with it.
So on the same line, I just wanted to also ask, if we could feed, just thinking about a very, an idea basically, where people all collect just like building the Tower of Babel, we collect all the data and feed into a supercomputer and the super artificial intelligence that you just spoke about. Out of the three categories, one category, which is super, and you feed all the data in, can that result into a omniscience kind of setup? If we have an omniscient computer or a bot or an AI programming, do we really need God?
Well, first I would challenge the notion that we could build an omniscient bot, because omniscient means all knowing. That's a level of infinity, if you will. It's like everything that's possible to know, which is an infinite amount of knowledge, that thing would know. Well, what is true of infinite is that anything that is finite will never become infinite, and anything that is infinite can never be divided into a finite number of finite categories. And so right now, all AIs are finite. And so the idea that we could build an omniscient AI is really kind of a contradiction. It misses how infinites and finites play together. So there's no place where our finite AI is going to become infinite in its knowledge. But I actually think there's there's an intriguing question that is a corollary to what you're asking, is that as this AI grows in knowledge, it's going to, we could ask the question, what's the evidence? Is there a God? Does it exist? Does a God exist or not? And this AI is going to have far more knowledge about that. It's probably going to draw conclusions that we don't entirely understand. Are we going to trust what it says? Now, given that Christianity argues there's a God who's revealed himself to us, right? We have a lot of people who say, well, I don't want that. I don't want to listen to that. So let's take this AI and just assume it actually gets the right conclusion. If the conclusion it draws is different from your worldview, if you think if you're an atheist and the AI says, yeah, God exists, are you actually going to listen to it? Or are we just going to be right back where we are here, where there's a God who created the universe and allows us to explore and understand him through his universe and through his revelation in Scripture, and yet we're still going to find people who say, no, I don't want to believe that, or some who say, yes, I believe it, some who say, I'm just not interested in that. I think we're going to be right back there, even if we could build this ASI that is far more intellectually superior than what we are. But ultimately, I think there is a truth to this world that is, people don't make up their own truth. There is a reality that we need to conform our thoughts to. And given all of the data I see so far, this AI in its conclusions is going to come out and say, yeah, God exists. And then the question would be, do we actually follow what it says or not? My suspicion is, if you take all the people today who say, yes, God exists and no, God doesn't exist, when the AI says, yes, God exists, we're going to end up with basically that same split.
So that's something that AI can analyze based on what the input we give. But what about, at least you give all the information about the countries, about the societies and how they run, what are the laws that they have, etc., etc., etc. And by giving that, don't you think that in the days to come, we can create a society, a community, which is more perfect than what we see today? Can AI be playing an important role in doing that?
I've thought about how to answer that question, and it's a difficult question to answer, because when you talk about a more perfect society, a better society, inherent in that question is what does perfect or better mean? And when you look at the different worldviews that exist throughout the world, they don't agree on that answer. At least in the West, there's a very strong idea that every human life matters. And we kind of take that for granted here in the West. But if you ask what worldview actually anchors the idea that all human life matters, a lot of people would want to say, well, atheistic naturalism does. But when you look at atheistic naturalism, there's ultimately no meaning to life. Our existence, at best, there's only meaning in the universe because we exist. So if that's true, whatever propagates humanity is what's good, not the individual. And so what you would want to do, I think, or you could make a very strong case that what's best is you eliminate the weak so that the strong survive, because that's what's going to propagate humanity. Is that really better or not, though? Because we spent a long time, we spent a lot of effort eradicating slavery and getting rid of these sorts of practices because, again, in the West, we have this idea that every individual is important. Well, Christianity anchors both of those, that we want humanity to thrive, but we also want each human to thrive. because we're made in God's image. And so the idea of getting everybody on board with hey, here's this great super society, we have to actually agree what that super society looks like or what worldview we're going to found it on. Now, I make an argument in my book, and I think I can, that if you want to develop AI, you want Christianity to be true because that's the worldview that allows us to enjoy the benefits that AI will bring and mitigate the peril that can result from developing AI. Because it's the one that anchors those things that we see important. People matter. Choice is important. Caring for one another, taking care of the environment. All of those things are anchored well in the Judeo-Christian worldview.
So are you saying that, whoever develops his worldview is going to be the ultimate worldview? Whoever is anchoring or developing this AI and feeding the information into, and his analysis is going to be replicated with the AI. So because it is done in that way, you can't really say which worldview is going to be the best worldview.
Well, I think more what I'm saying is assuming we're not at a place where the AI becomes sentient and starts making these decisions on its own. That's a different class of questions. But as we're going to be going through and making decisions, we have to decide which worldview actually allows us to accomplish the things that we think are important. And if we want to care for people, if we want to value people, if we want to take care of the environment, make sure the planet is thriving, if we want people to have good relationships, we have to ask which worldviews provide the foundation that that's what's important. And, again, you can make a very strong argument that atheistic naturalism doesn't put much value on the individual, doesn't put much value on a person. It puts value on a person only in a utilitarian sense. Are they good for something? Good for advancing a certain gene or something like that.
Right.
Eastern mysticism, you could ask that question. You could ask that question in postmodernism, where everybody's kind of making their own truth. These are the sorts of things that if you're talking about that super society, we have to, unless we cede control of the decisions to the AI, we're going to be the ones who determine that. And we need to think about which one actually gets us where we want to go. Because, again, it's going to be inevitable as we continue to build more and more powerful AIs, is that they're going to have a lot of power. And power either can be harnessed to bring about good, or it can be unleashed and will bring about destruction. Which are we going to do there, and how do we make those decisions? And my argument is that it's critical for humans to be involved in those decisions because we're the only ones that have an actual ethical, moral, philosophical system where we can make good decisions that way.
So those are the actual concerning words: ethical, moral, and philosophical worldviews. And as humans, we decide what kind of AI comes out and what kind of AI doesn't come out. And, we have apprehensions that the governments of different nations can actually decide for themselves what is good and what is not good for their country. So keeping that in mind, the conflicting governments and conflicting ideologies, if they exist, we all know that they exist, and using AI for the benefit of their own community, but not for the benefit of anybody else or any other community or any other nation. Do you see that the AI or the artificial intelligence is going to disrupt the world economy or the world order in that way? In the days to come. Not now, for sure, we don't have that right now, but in the days to come, do you see that?
Almost certainly that's the case. One of the interesting studies that I found was in terms of how elections play out. The last couple of elections in the United States have been rather contentious for various reasons. And there was a study done that just looked at how does the ranking of search engine results. So so you on Google, you type in search for this, and you get a list of 10 items on one page and then multiple pages afterwards. And so what they found, they did a study where they limited or built a specific kind of browser where they could control how the search results came up, and then looked at how people would vote in elections based on these results. And what they found is that just by manipulating how the third or fourth result, whether it was positive or negative towards a candidate, that they could actually sway votes up to 10 to 15% of the voters. Now, all the elections in the United States have been, a few percentage points. So this is the sort of thing that with an adept AI, you could sway the votes of the elections in the United States, which is a very powerful country. Now, you imagine that played out, different countries have different philosophies about how the world ought to work. Even throughout the 1900s, at least one of the reasons the United States went into the war was because they wanted to stop the advance of what they thought was an evil worldview. And so because of the West won World War II, now that sort of worldview is what has driven how the global world has kind of played out, if you will. Right. Imagine, if you will, you get some sort of dictatorial, totalitarian, just looking out for themselves type country. That's going to play out very differently for the world. Right. For all, I'm not saying the U.S. is perfect by any stretch, but after the war, the U.S. basically said, "Hey, we want the world to be strong," and so they loaned money and built the world economy so that the world worked well. That's not a given outcome. If the U.S. could have very easily said, "Hey, we're just going to control the world from here on out," but we didn't, because that's not what the worldview of the United States, the prevailing worldview, wanted. And so these are the sorts of concerns or the questions we have to ask, because AIs and the amount of data you collect have the capacity to control things on that world scale. And so we want to be very careful who has that power and what we do with it.
So obviously it is a concern that AI is knowledge based, and any human being with a team of human beings can actually pull in those resources and feed the machine with those resources and give the data into that machine, and the output of obviously will be the way you want it to be, the way you you want to control the human life and the communities and the societies, etc., etc. So there is definitely a concern like that, as you rightly said. That's a definite concern. In the end, I wanted to ask you, Jeff. Everything put together, maybe AI at this point of time, like today, is not a threat. It is maybe just a tool for all of us, as you rightly mentioned about the car, or some tool as a phone, etc., etc. We're using it, but do you foresee a time or a day, or an year, maybe some 20 years from now, 30 years from now, you see that the worldview of the AI becomes the supreme worldview? I don't know what it is. I don't know what kind of a worldview it is. I don't know if it is Christianity, or if it is Islam or Hinduism, or the naturalistic atheism, whatever it is. But the more data you feed into, is there a possibility that the machine builds its own worldview and starts dictating us what kind of worldview you should rely on?
I guess I'll just say that I think that's entirely determined by what we choose to do with the AIs, because I am skeptical that the AI will ever become sentient and start thinking for itself in the way we think about things. I think it will more and more mimic our behavior and will attribute sentience to it, but ultimately it's just going to be running algorithms, if you will. And so that's where I think, the AIs that we have today are powerful enough to just start disrupting how we do things. there's a movie out called The Social Dilemma that talks about the AIs that are behind social media. Google, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, those sorts of social media.
Right.
And those AIs are built, trying to gather information from the people, build a better thing, so that they can give you a better experience. But the way we've used that tool is actually increased polarization in our country. That's the way to get people onto the platforms. And so I think we have to be very vigilant. We need to ask ourselves this question: do I want the convenience that social media offers? Or rather, is the convenience that social media offers worth the polarization that inevitably ensues because of the way the AI is built? And just start asking the question, okay, as we're putting these AIs in, let's actually sit and think through, what are the good that can come out of this? What are the harm that can come out? And how do we do things so that we get the good and mitigate the harm? Because there's an aspect where what we've been talking about is very kind of doom and gloom about AIs,
right.
But AIs have the capacity to help us provide better medical coverage because they can diagnose diseases and pathologies much more quickly than we can. They have the capacity to mine databases and find drugs and therapies that just humans don't have the time to look at. They have the capacity to find criminals. They have there's a whole lot of things that we can use this tool to accomplish and actually make good things happen. And they're good things that won't happen or that will take a long time with just human intellect behind them, or rather with human intellect without utilizing the AI that human intellect develops. And so there's a lot of good out there and a lot of promise out there, but the only way we're going to use it well is if we ask the question, what are the good things and how do we get there and mitigate the damage or the harm that is inevitable, that's an inevitable part of the equation that we do. I mean, that's true with every technology we ever use. So let's do that with AI. And I just don't see a lot of those conversations happening as prominently as they need to. We just seem to be adopting the AIs and using them without thinking intentionally about what's the damage that can come and how do we mitigate it.
Yeah. One last question. I think this is where I want to end, but this is a very important thing, and so that's the reason I'm asking. How do we decide the accountability of the AI tools that we build? For example, you mentioned about law and criminality, how artificial intelligence can be a good tool to take care of that subject. But how about the same artificial intelligence being used by the law and the criminals, and you don't have an accountability? You just have to live with it. How do we decide on that?
That's a great question that I know a lot of people are talking about. Just take, for example, a self-driving car. The self-driving car goes out and it causes a collision. Well, if I'm driving the car, I'm the one responsible for it. But this is driven by an AI. Is the AI responsible? Is the car responsible? Is the company that built it responsible? We haven't thought through those conclusions yet. I mean, nobody goes out. I mean, if the car performs the way the manufacturer designed it and I run into something, nobody says, oh, that's the manufacturer's problem. They know that ultimately it rests with the driver because the driver is the one making the choices. Well, now you've got this combination of driver, AI, and corporation. And we haven't thought through and decided that yet. I don't know that I have the answer. Actually, my answer would be the accountability always needs to reside with a person. Because that's the person, that's the being that can make a moral choice. AIs can't make moral choices. AIs can just draw conclusions, and based on some criteria that we've programmed in or correlation they've developed, that's the only way they make choices. We're the only people who can make moral choices. So humans are the only ones that can be held accountable for them. But that's a conversation we need to have, and it's not happening as publicly as I think we need to do to really make a good decision.
Right. Well, it was a wonderful time speaking to you, Jeff, and lots of information, lots of insights into artificial intelligence, and it has been a privilege for us to have you on the show. Thank you very much for spending some time this morning with us. And in the end, would you like to say something for the audiences in terms of science and Christianity? And we end the show there.
Well, thanks. I appreciate the opportunity and really enjoyed our conversation. And I think the point that I would want people to walk away with is that it's very easy to take a kind of Pollyanna, ooh, AI is going to solve the world's problems, or ooh, AI is going to destroy the world. And it's just a lot more complicated than that. And what I've found as I've studied science faith issues is that science and Christianity work very well together. And so I've spent a lot of time trying to develop resources to show that Christianity is true. And one thing I love about AI is not only can we explore the question of whether Christianity is true, but we can explore the question of, is Christianity good? And I think if we're talking about AI and what will be good for humanity, Christianity comes out. We really want Christianity to be true because that's what's going to do the most good for humanity and for society. And so, encourage people to look into it. I think my book's coming out in 2022 and kind of explore that and just think about it. But Christianity really is a robust worldview in that it's true, but it's also good, and that's a great combination.
So have you covered these aspects in the upcoming book that you are about to publish?
Yes, almost everyththing we've talked about is covered in the book somewhere, and then there's even some stuff we haven't touched on in there as well.
So what's the name of the book that you are about to release?
We just came up with a title a little bit ago. I think we came up with The Peril and Promise of AI.
Oh, okay. The Peril and the Promise of AI. Of course, what we spoke is more on the promises and the perils of the AI. So I hope the audiences will definitely enjoy taking a copy of your book, and I hope it will be available on Amazon. So people can always go ahead and buy it on Amazon. So thank you very much, Jeff, and until we meet next time with another topic, and a couple of topics that I have in my mind are based on the books that you wrote. So probably we would request you to come help us understand those topics as well. And until then, thank you very much for participating in this show, and have a good day ahead. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I enjoyed our conversation and would love to come back and talk about some of those other topics because I find them fascinating. But thanks for having me on, and hope you enjoyed today as well.
వండర్ఫుల్, థ్యాంక్ యూ వెరీ మచ్. సో ఇది ఈరోజు కనువిప్పు కార్యక్రమంలో మనం చూసినటువంటి ఇంగ్లీష్లో మనం మాట్లాడుకున్న కాన్వర్జేషన్. కానీ సబ్ టైటిల్స్ రూపంలో మీకు యూట్యూబ్లో సబ్ టైటిల్స్ అనేది సెలెక్ట్ చేసుకుంటే మేము మాట్లాడుకున్న ఇంగ్లీష్ సంభాషణ మీకు టైటిల్స్ రూపంలో వస్తుంది. సో దాన్ని కనుక మీరు సెలెక్ట్ చేసుకుంటే అది మీకు కనిపిస్తుంది. కాబట్టి ఆర్టిఫిషియల్ ఇంటెలిజెన్స్ అనేటటువంటి ఈ పదము చాలా ఎక్కువగా మీరు వినే ఉంటారు. కానీ ఈ రోజుల్లో ఆర్టిఫిషియల్ ఇంటెలిజెన్స్ ఏ విధంగా క్రైస్తవ జీవన విధానాన్ని ఇంపాక్ట్ చేస్తుంది అనే అంశాన్ని మనం ఈరోజు మాట్లాడుకున్నాం. మళ్ళీ ఇంకొక ప్రోగ్రాంతో మీ ముందుకు వస్తాను. అంతవరకు ప్రార్థిస్తూ ఉండండి. రక్షణ టెలివిజన్ కొరకు సహాయ సహకారాలు అందిస్తూ ఉండండి. అలాగే దేవుని రాజ్యం మిషనరీ ఉద్యమం అనే పుస్తకం మీరు ఇంకా తెప్పించుకోకుండా ఉంటే మాకు కాల్ చేయండి. దేవుని రాజ్యం అనే పుస్తకం మీకు అందుబాటులో ఉంటుంది. థ్యాంక్ యూ వెరీ మచ్. హ్యావ్ ఏ గుడ్ డే.